June 1942. A German submarine surfaces off the coast of Amagansett, New York. 4 men paddle ashore in a rubber raft, carrying explosives and American currency. This was Operation Pastorius. It was the only time during the Second World War that armed German soldiers set foot on American soil. They were arrested within 2 weeks. Yet, in the popular imagination, fueled by works like The Man in the High Castle or Fatherland, this rubber raft is replaced by an armada. Battleships in New York Harbour, panzers rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue. Today, we are not interested in the ideology of that nightmare. We are interested in the physics of it. We are going to conduct a deep, systemic analysis of a transatlantic invasion, applying the hard logistics of 1943 shipping tonnage, fuel consumption, and naval architecture. We will prove that the Atlantic Ocean functions not as a highway, but as a filter, one that requires math, not fanaticism, to cross. To understand why the invasion is impossible, we must first establish the baseline reality of German maritime power. In 1939, Germany was a continental power, not a thalassocratic one. Its naval strategy was built on sea denial, using U-boats to cut enemy supply lines, not sea control, which is required to protect your own. The primary metric here is gross registered tonnage, or GRT. At the start of the war, the British Merchant Marine stood at 17.5 million GRT. The United States would eventually build over 30 million tons of shipping. Germany? Their pre-war merchant fleet was modest, and by 1943 largely trapped in the Baltic or at the bottom of the sea. An invasion force is a mouth that must be fed. It is a consumption engine. To sustain a force across an ocean, you do not just need soldiers, you need a conveyor belt of steel ships that is immune to disruption. Germany struggled to supply Rommel across the Mediterranean, a mere 300-mile hop. We are proposing a 3,500-mile operational radius. Because the reality is so lopsided, to even entertain this wargame, we must cheat. We must apply the steel assumption. For the next 45 minutes, we will grant the axis a fantasy scenario. Assume the United Kingdom has fallen. Assume the Royal Navy is neutralised or captured. Assume Germany has access to French and British ports without interference. Even with these God mode advantages, the logistics of an American invasion remain mathematically fatal. We are looking at a logistical equation defined by the US Army's own wartime data. One division slice, approximately 40,000 troops plus air support, consumes 1,600 tons of supplies per day. To invade the US East Coast, Germany would need a minimum of 20 divisions to secure a beachhead and perimeter. Do the math. 32,000 tons of dry cargo per day, 11.7 million tons per year. That is not a military manoeuvre. That is the industrial migration of a medium-sized nation. Let us analyse the vehicle of delivery. Standard cargo ships of the era, like the Liberty class, had a top speed of 11 knots. The round trip from Bordeaux to New York is roughly 7,000 nautical miles. With loading, unloading, and convoy assembly times, a single ship might make 3, perhaps 4 round trips a year. To deliver 11.7 million tons annually, you need a dedicated fleet of approximately 6 million deadweight tons, DWT. In 1943, Germany did not possess 6 million tons of ocean-going merchant shipping capable of surviving the North Atlantic winter. Furthermore, these ships require escorts. A convoy of 40 transport ships requires a screen of at least 6 to 10 destroyers. German destroyers, like the Type 1936A, were designed for the Baltic and North Sea. Their operational range was roughly 2,500 nautical miles at economic speeds. They physically cannot cross the Atlantic and return without refueling at sea. This introduces the tanker bottleneck. You now need a fleet of milch cow tankers, which are slow, explosive targets to refuel your escorts in the middle of a hostile ocean.
The geography is the next antagonist.
In the actual Battle of the Atlantic, the Mid-Atlantic Gap was a zone where Allied air cover could not reach U-boats. In our counterfactual, the roles are reversed. As the German invasion fleet approaches North America, it enters the combat radius of land-based US Army Air Force bombers and the US Navy's Atlantic Fleet. The US Navy in 1943 was not the Navy of 1941. It was commissioning Essex-class carriers and thousands of destroyer escorts. Operating from unsinkable aircraft carriers, airfields in Newfoundland, Maine and Massachusetts, American air power would subject the slow-moving German convoy to relentless attrition starting 1,000 miles out. Germany lacked a heavy strategic bomber or long-range maritime patrol aircraft, comparable to the B-24 Liberator, to suppress these defences. They would be sailing blind into a zone of absolute air superiority.
We must also standardise the unit of measurement. We are using the division slice. In World War II logistics, you don't just ship a soldier. You ship the soldier, his rifle, his food, the mechanic who fixes the truck that carries the food, and the surgeon who fixes the mechanic. The US planning figure was roughly 6.8 measurement tons per man for initial deployment. For a 20-division invasion force, approximately 800,000 to 1 million men when including Corps and Army-level support, we are talking about an initial lift requirement of 6 to 7 million measurement tons. This single lift would require more shipping than existed in the entire Axis-controlled pool. And that is just to get them there. If they land, they eat 20 kilograms of supplies per man per day. If they fight, ammunition consumption spikes by a factor of 5. If they move, fuel consumption spikes by a factor of 10. Here lies a critical asymmetry often ignored in alternate history. Motorization. The German army was largely horse-drawn. The Wehrmacht entered Russia with 600,000 horses. You cannot float a horse-drawn army across the Atlantic. Horses require fodder, huge volumes of water, and cannot be easily offloaded onto a beach under fire. Therefore, an invasion of America requires the Wehrmacht to be fully motorized. But Germany suffered from a chronic shortage of rubber and trucks throughout the war. To motorize a 20-division expeditionary force would strip the Eastern Front of every Opel Blitz truck and SD KFZ 251 half-track. And unlike horses, trucks drink gasoline. Germany's oil supply was barely sufficient for a continental war, relying on Romanian wells and synthetic plants. They simply did not have the petroleum reserves to fuel a transatlantic logistical bridge. Consider the Reverse Normandy problem.
For D-Day, the Allies spent 2 years stockpiling supplies in southern England, a mere 20 to 50 miles from the target beaches. They built Pluto, pipeline under the ocean. They built Mulberry artificial harbours. They had total air superiority. Germany has none of this. They are attempting an amphibious assault across 3,500 miles of open ocean, with no forward staging base. Iceland is too small and too distant. The Azores are insufficient. They must sail from France directly to the US coast. The time to target is not hours, it is weeks. This means any tactical surprise is impossible. The US Navy would track the Armada from the moment it left the Bay of Biscay. The element of surprise, essential for amphibious landings, is mathematically eliminated by the transit time.
Then there is the landing craft deficit. The Allies built specialised ocean-going landing ships, LSTs, LSDs, LCIs, capable of crossing oceans or being carried on davits. Germany's amphibious capability was improvised. River barges, Seabull ferries, and small craft designed for the English Channel.
These vessels are not seaworthy in the open Atlantic. You cannot tow a flat-bottomed Rhine barge through the North Atlantic swells. It will founder. Germany would need to design, test, and build a massive fleet of ocean-going amphibious assault ships from scratch, while simultaneously rebuilding their merchant marine and fighting the Russians. The industrial capacity for this naval construction did not exist. The Kriegsmarine's Plan Z, their pre-war naval expansion plan, was not scheduled for completion until 1948, and even that did not envision a massive amphibious capability.
We are establishing the boundary conditions of this simulation. The boundary is steel. In 1943, the US produced 88 million tons of steel. Germany produced 30 million. This disparity dictates that in a war of attrition at sea, which an invasion attempt is, the defender, the US, can replace losses 3 times faster than the attacker. Even if the German fleet sinks a US cruiser, a new one slides down the slipway in Philadelphia months later. If a German capital ship is damaged, it must limp back 3,000 miles to dry dock in France, effectively removing it from the war for 6 months. The repair loop alone makes sustained naval support of a beachhead impossible. For our simulation, we will select the most plausible target favoured by fiction, the New York metropolitan area. It offers the port facilities required to offload heavy equipment. A landing in Florida or the Carolinas might be easier, but the distance to the industrial heartland is too great. To kill the US, you must take the northeast. So, the German plan, let's call it Operation Seawolf, targets the beaches of Long Island and the capture of New York Harbor. The objective: secure a lodgment, capture the port intact, and hold against the inevitable American counterattack. The forces: Army Group America, 20 divisions, including 5 panzer divisions. The date: May 1st, 1944. We are ready to run the simulation. The simulation begins. The variables are locked. The German High Command has assembled every seaworthy hull in Europe. The fuel reserves of the Reich have been drained to fill the bunkers of this armada. The deception plans have failed because you cannot hide 1,000 ships. The US Atlantic Fleet is sorting from Norfolk and Newport. The US Army is mobilizing on the eastern seaboard. The outcome will not be decided by the bravery of the soldier, but by the burn rate of the heavy fuel oil in the boilers of the transport ships. Phase A begins now. The crossing. Phase A. The crossing. Hour 0. The armada departs from Brest, Saint-Nazaire and Lorient. The convoy formation covers 50 square miles of ocean. Almost immediately, the logistics of cohesion degrade. The speed of a convoy is determined by its slowest ship. To keep the heavy transports and the tankers together, the fleet is limited to roughly 9 knots. This slow speed makes them prime targets for submarines. But here, the roles are reversed. It is the US Navy submarines, the Gatto and Balao classes, that are hunting. Operating from New London, Connecticut, they do not need to hunt in wolf packs, coordinated by radio. The target-rich environment is so dense they simply cannot miss. American torpedoes, unlike the early war Mark 14s, are now functional. The attrition begins 500 miles off the coast of Europe. Day 3. The fuel crisis. We must look at the destroyers. A German Type 1936A destroyer holds roughly 700 tons of fuel oil. At 19 knots, it burns through that in about 4 to 5 days of continuous steaming. But combat maneuvering, sprinting to chase submarines or dodging air attacks, triples fuel consumption. By day 3, the escort screen is hitting Bunker B status, 50% fuel. They must refuel at sea. Refueling at sea is a delicate nautical ballet, requiring calm seas and skilled crews. Doing it under threat of submarine attack is suicidal. The armada must stop,
or slow to a crawl, to let tankers pass hoses to destroyers. This stationary target allows US submarines to converge. The mathematical certainty here is that to protect the transports, the destroyers must consume fuel they do not have. If they conserve fuel, they cannot protect the transports.
Day 7. The Mid-Atlantic.
The weather in the North Atlantic is non-negotiable. A spring storm hits. In a real invasion, weather delays can be absorbed if you are sitting in port, like Eisenhower delaying D-Day. But the German fleet is at sea. They cannot wait. The storm scatters the convoy. River barges and smaller landing craft being towed or carried on decks are lost or damaged. The seasickness among the troops, packed into cargo holds not designed for habitation, renders combat units ineffective. A soldier who has been vomiting for 7 days is combat ineffective before he even sees a rifle. The cohesion of the armada breaks down. Stragglers are picked off by US long-range patrol aircraft, B-24s, operating from Newfoundland.
Day 10. The Interception.
The fleet enters the air gap, but for the Germans, this is the death zone. They are now 1,000 miles from the US coast. The US Navy task forces intercept. This is not a balanced surface battle. The US Navy employs carrier-based aviation. Germany has no aircraft carriers. The Graf Zeppelin was never operational. The German fleet has no air cover except for float planes. It is a turkey shoot. American dive bombers and torpedo bombers strike the tankers first. This is standard doctrine. Kill the tankers and the destroyers drift. The Tirpitz, or Bismarck, if we assume they exist, might survive the first wave, but they are mission killed by rudder hits or sensor damage. The loss of tankers forces the German commander to make a decision: abandon the escorts or abandon the mission. He pushes on, leaving fuel-starved destroyers behind to be mopped up. Day 14. Arrival. The surviving transports, perhaps 70% of the initial force, sight the American coast. They have run a gauntlet of submarines and air attacks. They are tired, the ships are damaged, and the cargo has shifted. They approach the New York Bight. But the approaches to New York are not open water. They are arguably the most heavily defended coastal waters in the world. The US Army Coast Artillery Corps operates massive 16-inch gun batteries at Fort Tilden and Fort Hancock, overlapping Sandy Hook and the Rockaways. These guns are radar-directed. They outrange the German battleships. The German fleet cannot simply sail into the lower bay. They will be bracketed and sunk by heavy artillery firing from immune concrete bunkers. Furthermore, the water is mined. The US Navy mined the approaches to major harbours early in the war. Germany lacks the specialised minesweepers in this task force to clear a channel under fire. To clear a minefield requires slow, precise sailing in straight lines, suicide against coastal artillery. The fleet is forced to stand off, disembarking troops into landing craft miles from the shore, in rougher water than planned. The iron laws of hydrography are now dictating the battle. The draft of the heavy transports prevents them from getting close. The transfer of tanks from transport to lighter is slow and dangerous. Phase A ends not with a bang, but with a traffic jam at sea. Phase B, the Beachhead. Day 1. The landings begin on the south shore of Long Island, Jones Beach and Fire Island. The geography is deceptively difficult. These are barrier islands, separated from the mainland of Long Island by lagoons and marshland. The German panzer divisions, assuming they can get their tanks onto the sand, are immediately bottlenecked by the causeways. There are only a few bridges connecting the barrier beaches to the main island. These bridges would have been blown by local National Guard units hours ago. The German army is now trapped on a strip of sand with the Atlantic Ocean behind them and a swamp in front of them. This is the Gallipoli scenario, with better technology but worse geography. The Air War. Luftwaffe air support is non-existent. they cannot fly fighters from Europe. They might have brought a few rudimentary escort carriers, converted merchantmen, but these launch slow Bf-109Ts, which are no match for land-based US fighters. Within hours, the sky turns black with American aircraft. P-47 Thunderbolts from Farmingdale and Mitchell Field, literally minutes away from the landing zones, begin strafing the beaches. The US air sortie generation rate is effectively infinite because the airfields are local. Pilots can fly, attack, land, rearm, and fly again in 45 minutes. The German troops are pinned in the sand dunes. Movement during daylight becomes impossible. Logistics offloading must stop during the day, cutting the supply efficiency by 50% immediately. The stevedore problem. Let's look at the unloading math. To sustain the force, Germany needs to offload 16,000 tonnes a day. On D-Day, the Allies barely managed this with specialised LSTs that beached themselves. Germany is using cranes to lower crates into small boats, which then motor to the surf. This is an inefficient calm water method. In the Atlantic swell, transfer rates drop to perhaps 10 tonnes per hour per hatch. With 50 ships working, that's maybe 5,000 tonnes a day under ideal conditions. But under air attack, ships are manoeuvring, smoke is obscuring vision, and cranes are destroyed. The actual offload rate likely drops to 2,000 tonnes. The army is ashore, but it is effectively starving for ammo and fuel from the moment its boots hit the sand. They have brought what is in their rucksacks and vehicle tanks. That is a 3-day supply of food and a 100-kilometre supply of fuel. The American response. While the Germans struggle to cross the lagoons, the US strategic mobility machine activates. The United States has the densest rail network in the world. Within 24 hours, armoured divisions from Fort Knox, infantry from the south, and Marines from Quantico are railing toward the containment line. The US does not need to attack immediately. They just need to seal the exits. The bridges to Manhattan and the Bronx are blown. The tunnels are collapsed. The German army is contained on Long Island. This turns the invasion into a siege. And, in a siege, the side with the secure supply line wins. The US supply line is the entire North American continent. The German supply line is a 3,000-mile thread being cut by submarines. Day 3. The Panzers Act. A breakthrough is attempted. The German 4th Panzer Division tries to push west toward Brooklyn to capture port facilities. A Tiger tank consumes roughly 5 gallons of fuel per mile off-road. To move a Panzer Division 50 miles requires tens of thousands of gallons of gasoline. The fuel tankers have not been offloaded because ammunition was prioritised to fight off the air attacks. The advance stalls not because of enemy fire, but because the fuel gauges hit zero. German crews are forced to abandon their heavy armour in the suburbs of Nassau County. The heavy equipment, the pride of the Wehrmacht, becomes static pillboxes. Night of Day 3. The Naval Slaughter. The German transports are anchored offshore to offload. At night, the US Navy unleashes the Mosquito Fleet, PT boats and destroyers swarming from New York Harbour and New England. In the confused night action, the stationary transports are sitting ducks. Torpedo hits gut the supply ships. The German heavy surface units, the battleships, cannot manoeuvre in the shallow coastal waters to protect them without risking grounding. They are forced to withdraw to deeper water, leaving the transports exposed. By dawn on Day 4, the logistics fleet is burning. The umbilical cord to Europe is severed. Phase C. The sustainment crisis. Day 7. The army has been ashore for a week. They have advanced perhaps 20 miles. But the mathematics of consumption have caught up. A modern army is a biological and mechanical organism. It dies without caloric and chemical input. The troops are out of rations. They begin foraging, looting American suburbs. But the civilian population has fled or is hostile. There are no vast stores of grain to capture in a suburb. The water supply has been cut by the retreating Americans. Dysentery begins to spread. Medical supplies, usually low priority in the first wave, are exhausted. The wounded cannot be evacuated because there are no hospital ships capable of running the gauntlet back to France.
The Artillery Park.
The US Army has now assembled a grand battery on the mainland opposite Long Island. Hundreds of 155mm Long Toms and 8-inch howitzers. They don't even need to see the targets. Forward observers in Piper Cubs direct fire. The German beachhead is under constant, unceasing saturation bombardment. Every square yard of the landing zone is gridded and shelled. This prevents any further supply landings. The German army is now cut off from the sea. They are trapped in a Kessel cauldron of their own making. They have no fuel to maneuver, no ammo to counter battery fire, and no way to retreat. The degradation of the elite. The units that landed were the best Germany had, but an elite soldier without bullets is just a target. Morale collapses not because of cowardice, but because of the realization of isolation. In Russia, there was always the land behind them. Here, there is only the hostile Atlantic. The psychological impact of the oceanic trap takes hold. Surrender rates spike. Entire companies, realizing no relief column is coming, throw down their weapons. The German command structure fractures as radios fail due to lack of batteries. Phase D, the collapse. Day 30. The end is not a dramatic last stand, it is a whimper. The German pocket has shrunk to a few square miles of beach. The heavy equipment has all been scuttled or captured. The remaining troops are emaciated. The US Army launches the final reduction. It is a systematic clearing operation. There is no Battle of the Bulge counterattack here. There is just a mop-up. The surviving German commanders surrender unconditionally. 300,000 men go into captivity. The entire invasion force, 20 divisions, the core of the Wehrmacht, is deleted from the order of battle. The naval aftermath. The disaster at sea is even more total. In the attempt to support the landings, Germany has lost practically its entire surface fleet and 80% of its merchant marine. The Atlantic floor is littered with the wrecks of the Kriegsmarine. This loss is unrecoverable. Germany is now not just defeated in America, it is defeated in Europe. With no merchant ships, it cannot import iron ore from Sweden or food from the territories. The home front economy collapses instantly. The opportunity cost of the invasion was the survival of the Reich itself. By gambling everything on a transoceanic throw of the dice, they accelerated the end of the war by 2 years. Act 3. The aftermath. The geopolitical fallout is total. The defeat of the invasion force signals to the world the absolute supremacy of American logistics. The United States didn't just win a battle, it demonstrated that it is immune to conventional conquest. The oceanic moat is proven to be impassable without a naval and industrial superiority that no nation on Earth possesses. In this timeline, the war ends in 1944. The sheer loss of German manpower speeds up the Soviet advance from the east. Berlin falls sooner. The map of Europe is drawn differently, but the lesson remains the same. Why does this matter today? Because the physics of amphibious invasion have not changed. The numbers we ran, tons per man, fuel per mile, attrition rates, are the same numbers that govern a potential conflict in the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea today. Missiles have replaced artillery, and nuclear power has replaced oil for carriers. But the logistical burden of moving an army across water remains the hardest problem in warfare. The ocean is still a filter. It still demands a blood tax in tonnage.
The counterfactual isn't just a story, it's a stress test for reality. When we strip away the myths and the propaganda, we are left with the cold equations of logistics. Germany couldn't occupy America not because they lacked the will, but because they lacked the math. They were defeated by the density of water and the caloric needs of the human body. History is often written by the victors, but it is decided by the supply clerks. If you want to understand not just what happened, but what can happen in our future, you need to understand these systems. This was a simulation of the impossible, but the possible is happening right now in the supply chains of the Pacific. To see the math behind the next major conflict and to join the war room, subscribe. We don't do vibes here, we do tonnage. Class dismissed.